Anyone like to share?
It's using the chain of linguistic items in a given context to convey a certain message.
The ability to fill time with talk.
The ability to fill time. Yes. Yes.
The ability to express yourself in given situations.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we might say that fluency is the capacity to produce language in real time without undue pausing or hesitation. That's a general definition, but with the beginning of communicative methods in the late 60s and the early 70s, that definition was broadened to include communicative competence. So that fluency then began to be defined not only as being able to produce language without hesitating, but the ability to communicate meaningfully and in a way that is culturally appropriate. Taking that definition one step forward, Parrott tells us that fluency is the ability to communicate the intended message, but also to adjust that message according to the listener's responses, and the use of strategies such as paraphrasing and gesture to compensate, for instance, where vocabulary is lacking. More recently, as recently as the 90s, we had Michael Lewis, his lexicon approach, which tells us that fluency is our ability to use lexical phrases. The advantage of this is their more efficient retrieval from memory, makes it easier to remember, and of allowing the speakers and the hearers to direct their attention to the larger structure of the discourse, rather than focusing very narrowly on individual words. So, the next question is, what do fluent speakers need to do, or fluent speakers in conversation? What do they need to be able to do? So a fluent speaker needs to be able to follow what other people are saying, plan what to say in response, retrieve the words they need to respond from the long-term memory, as well as to apply semantic and syntactic rules, grammar rules, to the lexis in order to formulate a grammatically correct utterance. Now bear in mind that this process is all happening in the short-term memory, and research shows that the short-term memory can only hold 7 discrete items of information at one time, which begs the question, how do we ever manage to make sentences of more than 7 words at once? So what makes fluent speech possible? We can identify 3 broad categories that a fluent speaker needs in order to produce fluent speech. One, the first would be knowledge, and by knowledge we mean knowledge of the grammar system, knowledge of lexis, an understanding of discourse, as well as phonology. Secondly, a fluent speaker needs routines, or skills if you like, which enables them to retrieve and use this knowledge from their memory automatically as possible. Finally, for non-fluent speakers, strategies. And strategies come in where, to compensate for a lack either of knowledge or of routines can help us to give the impression of fluency, even if we're not fluent speakers. So let's look at these three categories in a bit more detail. First of all, knowledge. What do we mean by knowledge? Discourse knowledge, an understanding of the macro structure of the speech act. So thinking about things like socio-cultural conventions, things that are the same and different in L1 and in English. For instance, whether a topic is appropriate or not. I'm sure lots of you have been asked if you're married, what your religion is. So taboos that exist in English, which may not exist in L1. Secondly, things like turn-taking, habits around taking turns in conversation, that speakers tend to take proportional turns. They speak for the same amount of time rather than one dominating the other. We might also, in discourse knowledge, we might also consider the relationship between the speakers, and by that we're talking about similarities and differences. So, are they close in age? Are they far apart in age? How does that affect the language we're using? What about gender? Your status. Are you talking to your friend? Are you talking to your boss? Next, where and when the speech act is happening, the context of the speech act. Is it taking place at work, in a bar, in a social context, at home? Which country is it happening in? Finally, discourse markers are also very useful. Discourse markers are signals in speech which let listeners and speakers understand where the conversation is going. So words like "I see you," really, a form of back channeling to let the other participants in the conversation know that we're following them. Words like "anyway," to change the topic. The next type of knowledge, or one of the other kinds of knowledge that speakers need, knowledge of formulaic speech units, and this going back to Lewis's definition. So first of all, adjacency pairs. Adjacency pairs are highly predictable units of exchange, things that we almost always say. How are you? Anything else? Okay. Fixed phrases, things like, would you like some? Can I? Could you? Yes. And finally, collocations. I think that we more or less all know what collocations are. Collocations, very highly frequent units of speech. For example, have has a noun, as a verb. We can have fun. We can have a conversation. We can have a picnic in the park with my friends. Types of knowledge that fluent speakers need. Then we move on to what fluent speakers need to be able to do. And here we're talking about skills and routines. So one of the first things, and I think you touched on this, one of the first things a fluent speaker needs to be able to do is clause chaining. And by that we mean stringing together relatively independent, clauses, relatively independent clauses. And Thornbury gives us a nice example, and he said to me, "Oh Jane," he said, "that's gas, isn't it? Your barbecue." Being able to string those little chunks together, which enables a fluent speaker to buy time. It's a way of micro-planning what you're going to say next. Okay, so subject, verb, give yourself a moment, plan the next bit, and continue with your chain of clauses. Secondly, a fluent speaker should be able to pause appropriately, and by pausing appropriately we mean to pause at the boundaries of clauses rather than within clauses. Thirdly, we need to try to help our students to use prominence. Do we all know what prominence is? Stress, emphasis, if you like, and chunking. A again, runs of speech. We're going to look at this in some more detail in a moment. Finally, to be able to monitor and repair their speech on the go as it's happening. So if you make a mistake, being able to correct yourself if you don't understand, being able to ask for clarification. And of course, this is all happening real time. We also said, apart from knowledge and skills, excuse me, that non-fluent speakers use strategies to give the impression of fluency. For example, pause fillers, okay, these pauses that are occurring between the independent clauses. Okay. We might say, well, okay, when we're thinking in order to gain time. Remember we said in the beginning that this is all happening in the short-term memory, and the short-term memory can only hold 7 items. So it's a battle against time, really. Next, vague language. Very useful, the importance of being vague. Okay? It also sort of touches on paraphrasing when you don't have, or you can't find the word that you need. Right? You can't get to that vocabulary quickly enough. So we use vague language. We say stuff, or the thing, or words like that. Formulaic expressions to buy time. Now, let me see. That's an interesting question. Let me think about that. Again, to help buy time. And finally, strategies for repair and phrasing. What I mean is to correct yourself, to make yourself even clearer. Another way of doing this is to reformulate or repeat what the person said to you. So simply repeating what your conversation partner said to you and then expanding on that. Okay, so what are the implications of this for teachers? How does this help us? What can we do with this information? Well, first of all, I think it implies a dual focus. On the one hand, we want to look at speaking as a skill from the bottom up. That is, taking the smallest parts of speech and building them up bit by bit into a conversation. And just some examples here, we might look at the relationship between stressed and unstressed syllables, building up to the length of run or the number of syllables between pauses, the average length of pauses between clauses, and finally focusing on the rate of speech, or how quickly someone is able to speak. Bottom up. Secondly, I said that bottom up is not enough. So we're going for an approach that looks not only at the bottom up, but also top down. And going back to what we said in the beginning, knowledge of discourse, okay, understanding the genre of the speech act, and working down from that spoken discourse, working down. How can we approach fluency in the classroom? What can we do to help our students master the knowledge, the skills, and the strategies that they need? So first of all, again, Thornbury gives us a wonderful approach, the 3 A's. We need to raise awareness. We need to raise awareness among our students of the characteristics of fluency. So naturally, we need to know what the characteristics of fluency are and help our students to become familiar with those characteristics. Secondly, appropriation. Appropriation activities are those which help learners to experiment, to explore the language, to play with the language. It gives them a chance to practice. And finally, autonomy, which hopefully we moving our students toward, where students feel that they are in control of the language themselves. And I'd just like to add that the role of the teacher in each of these stages or phases, if you like, is slightly different. So in awareness raising, really we're looking for our students to think, process, observe. The role of the teacher is that of guide. In the appropriation phase, and bearing in mind this is fluency we're talking about, the teacher is present, but not intrusive. The teacher is there to support, to extend the students, and to correct and encourage, obviously in non-intrusive ways that are not going to frighten them or make them clam up. Finally, in the autonomy stage, really the teacher is taking a back seat. What we want to be doing here is helping our students to self-regulate, helping our students to monitor their own speech so that they feel in control of the language. Okay, and I use the word feel because I think that it's important that the student feels in control, whether they actually are or not. The confidence that comes with feeling in control, feeling that you own the language, it's your language, and you are able to correct and repair. Okay, so we're going to now look at a few activities to help us develop these three phases, and hopefully it will become a bit clearer as we go along. So, the first activity we're going to look at is under the title, or under the heading of awareness raising. And we're raising awareness of the knowledge that our learners need. And by that, this activity is designed to raise awareness of social cultural conventions, appropriacy of topic, and also of turn-taking. So the way I like to do this activity is very often as pre-listening. By pre-listening, there's debate of whether we should do any pre-listening. This activity is designed also to introduce a topic. So at this stage, I'd like you to look at task 1 on your handouts. Okay, task 1. And please talk to a partner about task 1. Having discussed it, then I've selected a semi-authentic bit of speech and video, downloaded it off the internet. I would then play the video for the students. Again, more advanced classes would probably not need a script, okay? But for lower level classes, or for people who want, there's a script on page 2. Okay. This would now be extending from awareness to appropriation and hopefully autonomy. So let's watch the video.
Are you not having fun?
No! I was going to say, I haven't been on a date since Sarah died. I didn't realize it'd be this weird. I'm sorry.
It's fine, Max. Do you want to talk about her?
I don't know. I think a first date conversation about my dead girlfriend might be a little heavy.
Heavy. I love heavy.
Okay. Well, she grew up in Illinois.
Just like me. What was her major?
Philosophy.
That's so interesting.
It's not like she wanted to be a philosopher. She always knew she wanted to help people. She thought by studying how various cultures fundamentally differ in the way they view life, then she'd be able to interact more efficiently with them. She wanted to join the Peace Corps and just travel the world doing whatever she could to make it a better place. She was kind of a Buddhist that way.
Sure. That's great. Yeah.
That felt pretty good.
See? Not too heavy at all. Light.
If Sarah were here right now, she'd say, okay, you dorks, stop talking about me and start talking to your date. So, tell me, Casey, what's on your mind?
Well, actually, this girl, Franny, she stole my parking spot at the house. She didn't have this whole. You know what? Never mind. It's so not important. Should we get drinks or something? Are you thirsty? Because I'm dying. I'm of thirst.
Okay. I'll get us a couple of drinks.
Okay, so at this stage, I'd probably then ask the students to look at task 2 on the paper, either with or without the scripts, okay, which is, as I said, then designed to move this activity forward into the appropriation stage. Okay, the next activity, still in awareness raising, is designed to help students become aware of prominence and the vital role that prominence plays in meaning. And we're going to take a closer look at that now. So take a look at page 3 of your handout, please. Prominence. Step 1, you write a series of sentences and multiple choice answers, as you see in task 1. Step 2 would be to read the questions aloud, taking care to emphasize the content words. So let's do number 1 and 2 together. Please look at your worksheets, number 1 and number 2 together. You've got 2 sisters, haven't you? Can you hear which word is stressed? You've got 2 sisters, haven't you? No, just 1. Okay. Let's look at number 2 on that worksheet. You've got 2 sisters, haven't you? No, 2 brothers. Okay. Helping our students to become aware of how the meaning in that sentence changes, purely depending on which word we're stressing. So let's do 3, 4, 5, and 6 together. You might like to underline the stressed word if you want to. Okay. So number 3, you work in London, don't you? You work in London, don't you? You can answer.
No, I do.
Okay. Number 4, is that Mary's father? You can answer. Let's try it again. Is that Mary's father?
No, it's her husband.
No, it's her husband. Hear the word father being stressed. Is that Mary's father? No, it's her husband. Let's look at number 5. Did you say you had a new red dossier? No, it's a Hyundai. What about if I said, did you know you had a new red dossier? Silver. Blue. Okay. Question 6. Do you need English for your work? Alright. So So this sort of activity I find very, very useful to raise awareness with our students of the effect of prominence on meaning. On this worksheet, you might look, task 2 is designed to take this activity from awareness into appropriation. Okay? The students get a chance to play, to experiment with the language, to explore, stretch themselves, okay, and to practice it with their partners. And finally, task 3, once again, appropriation and autonomy. The next type of activity we can use with our students in class are appropriation activities. Again, we're getting our students to play with the language, use the language, experiment with it. Mistakes are encouraged. And we said, again, the type of knowledge that they need, formulaic knowledge. So this activity is designed to help students with collocations. It's an activity that my team learners really love. It's designed to help students remember and also to use the collocation have plus a noun is a verb. So usually what I do is start straight away with the video. This is courtesy of a teacher who I admire enormously. He's on the internet. His name's Jason Levine, also known as Fluency MC. If you've not come across him, highly, highly recommend it.
What time is it? Oh, not a dang telephone again.
It's Fluency MC. Have a party, have fun, have a cool, have a problem, have good weather, have a get together, have a test, have trouble, have friends, have plans, have a good time.
You have it in.
Let's have a party and have fun. We'll have a blast. You'll have good memories of college class. You can have a problem that doesn't last, like when you have a cold, but get over it fast. You can have a test or have a paper to write and have trouble falling asleep at night. You can have a bite of some delicious food. Don't have a frown on your face. Get out of your bad mood.
Have a party, have a fun, have a pool, have a problem, have good weather, have a get together, have a test, have a trouble, have friends, have plans, have a good time. You have it in you.
When you have friends, you have the chance to have a great weekend. You can have plans to have a get together. If you have good weather, you can have a picnic.
Okay, usually I would play it all the way through, but for time purposes, I'm going to cut it there. At this stage, I would give the students a script. So please take a look at the script. It's called You Have It In You. We might introduce the topic, ask what it is that you have in you, etc. Take a look at your handout now and see if you can identify this collocation and underline it. Okay, I'm getting signs that we're running out of time, so I'm sorry to cut you short, but just moving on. At this stage, it's appropriation, so we want the students to play with it. So at this stage, please would you all stand up? And we are going to perform with the video.
Oh, not a dang telephone again.
It's Fluency MC. Have a party, have fun, have a cool, have a problem, have good weather, have a get together, have a test, have trouble, have friends, have plans, have a good time. success, have trouble, have friends, have plans, have a good time. You have having you. Have a chance to have a great weekend. You can have friends, get together. If you have good weather, you can have a picnic in the park or wherever. Have a few laughs, have a good time. Have conversations on the grass in the sunshine. Have a lemonade. Have a afternoon nap in the nice cool shade. If you have kids, you can bring them too. Have a softball game. Have a fun, love to have it in you. Have success, have a dream, have self-esteem, have determination, have an education, have goals, skills, experience, and patience. Have no fear, have it in you. To have success, you gotta have a goal and do that.
The last type of activity that we're going to talk about today are activities designed towards moving students toward autonomy. And remember, at this stage, teacher is in the background. Here we don't want to interrupt our students, to be able to prepare their own speech, fix their own errors, etc. So the next activity that we're going to talk about actually can be directed to any of these strategies, depending on your purposes, depending on the level, depending on the class, all of the above. And usually the way this would work is conversation circles. I'm sure you're all familiar with concentric circles. Students sit in concentric circles, an inner circle, student B, an outer circle, student A, sitting face to face so that they can make eye contact. I would then hand out a series of pretty random conversation questions. Again, these can be graded according to students' levels. And I've given you 2 examples. And there are many wonderful websites on the internet. Just Google conversation questions. You'll find thousands. So I've given you 2. One's called Getting to Know You, which I find works very, very well, usually the first week, first 2 weeks. As an icebreaker. The other one is about food, which I think is a topic that we're all very familiar with. Sam, any, would you like? Beginners, okay, useful in that context. But as I said, there are a million themes on the internet. Just Google conversation questions. Then students have these conversation questions in front of them. The benefit of giving them a lot of questions is if they feel uncomfortable about answering one question or asking a certain question, they can ask any question and in any order. Ask and answer questions with a partner for 2 to 3 minutes, and then the circles move, change partners. Usually I would ask them to change partners 2 or 3 times before stopping the activity. Just a word for teachers or for anyone who hasn't ever tried this activity before. Students take a little bit of time to warm up. It's not comfortable always for them to sit face to face. So this is what makes it autonomy, an activity geared towards autonomy. They have to find their comfort zone. So at first, very often the first round, if you like, of peer communication, you might find it a bit quiet, not terribly productive. Let the activity run, let it run. They get into it, usually the second or third partner that they have. Okay. Asking and answering with a partner, change partners, usually 3 times. While this is going on, the teacher's in the background with a little notebook and pen, making notes of the particular strategy focus that you chose as your aim in the beginning, whether it's pause fillers, whether it's back channeling, letting the listener know, communication strategy. Okay? So you're walking around just making notes on your notepad. After 3 partner changes, we usually stop the activity, go to the board, recast the student's language on the board, ask the class how it can be improved. Okay, this is a non-intrusive form of correction and of scaffolding and supporting our students without making them feel embarrassed or picked on. And they also do recognize their own speech, which makes it much more memorable. Focus can be discourse markers, paraphrasing, communication strategy, any of the above strategies, and then once we've done the recasting on the board, allow the activity to continue once again. In my experience, students love this activity. They have so much fun with it. There's lots of laughing, lots of smiling. But as I say, it takes usually a few moments for them to get into it if they're not used to it. Finally, a brief summary of do's and don'ts for us as teachers in the classroom. Firstly, board work. Okay, I've tried to make a rule of thumb for myself, never ever to write a single word, one word at a time on the board. No single words. Always collocations. Okay, so we don't write fun, we write have fun. Have fun with our friends. Try to stay away from single words as much as possible. It's helping our students to develop those formulaic units of speech. Secondly, as teachers, I think we need to be very clear about our aims in speaking activities, whether our aim is accuracy, that is, students mastering correct target language that they've been exposed to, or whether our aim is more fluency focused. I think that we're all familiar with this idea that very strong accuracy focus in the early stages of speaking practice can stifle fluency. Students become afraid of making mistakes, intimidated, and they clam up. Okay, so let them make mistakes. Thirdly, quality teacher talk. I know people think that we shouldn't talk, there should be no teacher talk. I definitely don't agree with that. I think that particularly in an EFL context where our students can't walk out of the classroom and hear English spoken, it's our responsibility and our duty to model speech for our students. We are their model of English. And so we need to take that on and model these phrases, especially formulaic phrases. This is very useful for beginners, for oral learners. Phrases like, would you like? Would you like? Can I hear you say it? Would you like?
Would you like?
Would you like?
Would you like?
Okay, let me hear you say it.
Would you like?
Okay, students appreciate that a lot. It gives them a chance to master the stress pattern. It can be complicated for them at early levels. It's a form of practice. Fourthly, raising awareness of the difference between written and spoken English. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. Raising awareness that conversation is spontaneous and jointly constructed, meaning that it's messy, very messy. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. They're constantly repairing what they say. They repeat themselves. We need to let our students see this through transcriptions of natural language, and you'll see an example of that in the transcription you have in your handout of the video. Okay, it gives our students confidence to realize that they don't have to speak in perfect written grammar, like they shouldn't. Number 5, we've touched on it already, raising awarenesses of cultural similarities and differences. Okay, not only the differences, but also the similarities between L1 and English. Is it okay in your culture to talk about religion with someone you don't know? Is it okay in your culture to talk about your job with someone you don't know? Okay, differences and also similarities. Number 6, stimulate real speaking as much as possible in class. Okay, by this I mean where students are free to explore, to experiment, to make mistakes. 7, using non-threatening correction techniques. We could give another presentation entirely just on this subject, but very briefly, recasting, as we discussed earlier, recasting and reformulating the students' own language, taking the words that our students are using, writing them up, editing it, so to speak, writing it up more correctly on the board, making it much, much more memorable for the students. Some references, if anyone is interested. And yes, so to sum up, I think what this shows us, or what this says to us as teachers, is that we really need to think about the genres of speech that our students need, and also the characteristics of those genres, so that we can help our students to be more fluent participants in conversation.